please be kind. Um, Firstly, so I'll be talking about genomic order management, following on from Patrick's talk earlier today on reporting. I'll be looking at the other side of the coin, which is largely the order management side. Who am I? I'm an interoperability standards architect from NHS England. NHS England is the oversight and governance body for the NHS in England, so slightly kind of not a healthcare provider, but more kind of a government arm's length body. So starting off, what's our vision? So within England, we expect by the year 2035 that genomics will make up at least 50% of healthcare episodes and interventions. Now, to support this, the NHS has released a strategy, so a 5-year vision for accelerating genomics within the NHS and making it become routine, genetic testing become routine practice. Key to this for the audience in this room is priority 3, which is enabling genomics to be at the forefront of the digital and data revolution. So at the moment, within the UK, we have large amounts of unstructured data. And so this is, even at the ordering process, orders are sent in via paper. So the clinician fills out a paper form. This is sent along with the sample via post to the lab. And this is manually entered into the LIMS. And there's lots of manual duplicate entry that can result in errors and increased burden for clinicians and lab technicians. This also means that there's really no visibility nationally or for the requesting clinician themselves in terms of where is my order, what's happening with it, when am I going to get results back. And send away management is quite complicated as well. So the lab needs to send it on to another specialist lab. Then the requesting clinician doesn't have any visibility of that and needs to jump through multiple hoops to actually find out more information, or the lab needs to go through multiple hoops to request more information. So we're running 3 large projects at the moment within in informatics. The first is digitization of the test directory itself. So this includes eligibility criteria, the tests that can be ordered, the targets for those tests, as well as methods to make it easier for the clinician to actually request a test. Genomic Order Management, which is e-requesting and workflow support for giving national visibility of what's happening with orders. And on the other side, a unified genomic record that pulls in genomic information across federated data sets and allows one point of call for data access and management. Just to give a bit of overview of how we look like in the Genomic Medicine Service. So England is split up into 7 regions, each of which is controlled by a single genomic laboratory hub, which triages and processes orders from all of the trusts within their region. At the moment, what we currently look like is that, as I said before, we have that single flow of information. So ordering entity sends their information to this sample collection facility. That sends information to the genomic laboratory hub. It may send information again to the remote hub and local genomic lab to actually do the testing. And we see that at the moment, there's variation in how genomic tests are ordered nationally. So different regions request genomic tests differently. We have lots of challenges due to paper usage and duplication and lack of visibility and inefficiencies more generally. What we're looking to do is switch over to a national broker. So everyone interacts with one national broker, and there's only then one endpoint that they need to interact with, and then by virtue of that, standardize what genomic tests look like nationally. So what we're essentially doing is breaking up that point-to-point interaction between organization A and organization B. They send their request to the order management broker. This pulls in information from the test directory to understand whether this is a valid test, what the markers that should be investigated are, and has an internal workflow management engine to identify what the tasks that need to be performed are. It then sends that information on to the lab that needs to perform that test. And once that test is complete, saves information into a unified genomic record. And I'm only going to be talking about the green bit in the center at the moment. We also have an order management portal, which supports organizations which are kind of less digitally mature to still order genomic tests electronically. And this is just another view of that information. So rather than having messages flow along this path, they will flow to the central systems. So in terms of investigation of standards, there were a number of areas that we needed to look at. Firstly, the test order data itself. So the amount of information and clinical history that's required for a genomic test is quite large. more than what you typically see in a pathology test, because you need that clinical history and familial linkage of the patient to understand um, kind of the interpretation of the variants that are found. We also needed to understand how workflow and order management should be done. So not only is it transferring of data from a placer to filler, it's actually managing the tasks that need to be performed across multiple organizations. Then there's structured reporting, and I'll touch on what we're doing with that later on. And genomic data file management, because the data files themselves are quite large. They can't move around the system in the same way FHIR messages can. There are a number of scenarios that we also needed to support within genomics. So there's your basic non-WGS, WGS, rare disease and cancer, but we also wanted to support tests where there aren't any samples associated, such as reanalysis and reinterpretation, where you're just re-looking at the data. There's also fetal testing, so testing on patients which aren't born yet, and this raises other challenges when we're trying to align with other standards such as HL7 EU Lab or IPS, which require the patient to have a birth date. Then there's also testing on duos and trios. So some entities within the NHS consider a duo trio test to be one request with multiple participants. Other entities think of them as linked tests. So one test, 3 tests under a similar requisition, each with one participant. And so we need to kind of rationalize the two. In terms of inputs, we have a national genomic testing process. So this was done, a large amount of business analysis work was done by the genomics unit in the NHS to understand what is the end-to-end process flow for genomics and all the tasks that need to be performed, all the way from sample and request linkage to sample processing, sample preparation, running of a bioinformatics pipeline, interpretation, reporting, etc. And those are broken down into high-level tasks. We also came through consultation with all of the labs in England, came up with a master data set. So all the information that is actually currently requested on paper forms and all the information that labs say that they need in order to do a interpretation. And obviously we have the requirements from the previous slide. So in terms of a discovery of standards, our main focal point was FHIR workflow. So essentially, placer orders a test via a service request sent to the central broker. The central broker itself instantiates a number of tasks. These are based on the tasks that are identified in the NGTP. It assigns automatically those tasks to filler organizations depending on routing available within our test directory. And those fillers then send in updates to those tasks as they perform them. So for example, if they've processed a sample, they mark that task as complete, attach associated information with that. So for example, the specimen resource for the DNA that's extracted, and the final stage, attach a diagnostic report. That diagnostic report can then go back to the placer to inspect. And there were a number of standards around this that we needed to align with. So for example, IHE has the pathology and laboratory medicine framework that we needed to make sure was supported, as this is already in use in labs. We needed to align with the HL7 UK core profiles to make sure that obviously anything that we're doing within genomics, firstly, fits along with the rest of the UK, and secondly, all of the genomic data that we need in addition, or any extensions, are supported within the UK core. We also needed to align with HL7 Europe, as HL7 EU Lab. So if we want to share reports outside of the UK. For structured reporting, we're using the Genomics Reporting Implementation Guide as our gold standard. So using the diagnostic report as a focal resource with observations for variants and implications. There's also open air archetypes that are within genomics. So we've got the variant detail archetype as well as the PGX pharmacogenomics test result archetype that we've now mapped into FHIR, and also mapped OMOP standards into FHIR using the Common Data Models Harmonization IG. Alongside this, we also needed to support binary genomic information, and because it doesn't make sense to translate all of the genomic data into FHIR. So we're using GA4GH specifications there, such as DRS and HTS-GET, to interrogate genomic data files and using genomic operations on top of that where that makes sense. And we're also integrating with any services that already exist naturally, such as the patient demographic service, which is our master patient index. This is just a slide for people's benefit of what I've already discussed, and links out for when you get the slides to follow on what we've looked at. In terms of the architecture itself, I won't dwell on this too much. We have a proxy that serves as the kind of entry point for all national APIs, and that's APIM. When a request comes into the broker, which is currently based on Happy for the alpha, but we're looking at other solutions. We first automatically route it, as I said before. We validate the test itself is correct, and do some FHIR validation as well as business rules validation on top of that to make sure that the correct data for that test type is present, and then generate the tasks underneath it. So I know we've settled on FHIR, but we understand, especially in the UK, HL7v2 is quite prevalent for order comms. The reason why we've used FHIR instead of HL7v2 is because we wanted to support the functionality that RESTful provides. So, for example, updating an order rather than replacing an order, and having national visibility of that order, not just sending it point to point. We also wanted to support distributed fulfillment, so assigning tasks to organizations rather than sending that request itself to one organization. Now, in terms of the connecting to the core broker itself, there were three options. So first, native interoperability with EPI and LIMS, integration via an integration engine, so uplift from HL7v2 to FHIR, and via web portal. And we found there's kind of pros and cons to each approach. For our alpha, we partnered with the North Thames GLH, which is made up of Imperial, Great Ormond Street Hospital, and Royal Marsden, and because they had quite a varied setup in their local infrastructure. So using Epic Beaker, a shared instance of Epic Beaker, as well as Cerner and WinPath and CoPath for their LIMS systems, and really wanted to test out, does this high-level architecture work? And get feedback from the alpha participants. And as part of this, we also ran a couple of connectathons. And just to show the breadth of testing that occurred, we had Imperial, for example, request a test in Cerner, sent it through to their TIE, uplift from HL7v2 to FHIR to send it to the broker. That can be then picked up by Great Ormond Street in Epic Care. They can identify that this request is a whole genome sequence test, for example. So they forward it on to Genomics England, which handles our whole genome sequencing. Phenotypes in the background updates this order with phenotypic details and HPO terms. GEL interrogates the broker directly using FHIR and reports back a result, and then that can be picked up by the web portal. And so this all happened and was demonstrated in our last Connectathon in February. This is just an example of like what I've just discussed, and we've got in our guidance kind of sequence diagrams to show how we might expect certain kind of common patterns to work. So in terms of next steps, we want to align our existing data sets to collections that labs are already expected to provide. So for example, the National Disease Registration Service, undertake a review of terminology that's used in genomics, because at the moment, both for the OpenAir archetypes and the Genomic Reporting Implementation Guide, it's quite open in terms of the coding schemes that you may use because they're international by nature. But for the UK, we need to tie that down slightly. Expand our implementation guide to cover UGR and digital test directory. Implement subscriptions and notifications, and expand it possibly to other reporting and requesting domains. And finally, in terms of key scenarios, we've got duo and trio testing to still look at, fetal testing, error handling, and outcomes. I won't go over the next phases, but currently we're at the end of the alpha phase, and these are a few links. Thanks. Sorry, this was kind of a whirlwind tour, but needed to make sure that I got through all the content in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, Omar Khan. Very nice. Do we have some questions? There is one question.
Thank you, Omar. So I guess my question was the slide that you had shown previously about kind kind of the challenges and the opportunities. There was a lot of talk about local integrations. And I'm wondering if you're kind of baking in the concept of the single patient record that's being kind of spoken about in in the news in the UK as part of that roadmap. Are you looking forward to that, or do you think that's going to ease some of those struggles? And do you rank your opportunities kind of based on that? Is that at the forefront of your mind, or
Yeah, so
just
that
something that's happening? Like,
it is a kind of parallel stream of work for us, but with looking at the UGR or the Unified Genomic Record to be a subsection of that single patient record. So the single patient record being like the kind of holistic view of the patient, and then there'll be a genomics element of it. And the UGR itself, we're expecting to be kind of that central discovery piece. So linking out to where that data exists and allowing you to run federated queries on that data rather than it pulling all the information into one place, because we can't really transport genomic information in that way.
One more question over here.
What are the use cases for CDS hooks?
Oh, yeah. So I had that on the slide. I didn't have time to cover it, but we're supporting local implementations for clinical decision support in pharmacogenomics. So at a prescribing event, use genomic information to understand whether there's a contraindication for the kind of medication that you want to prescribe. And that's running in Manchester Trust at the moment.
Thank you very much. If there are no further questions, oh, there is one.
Hi. I know you're still in the alpha phase, but have you guys thought about how you'll be incenting adopters for the model? And if you can speak to that or not, it's also okay.
Yeah, so there's both a carrot and a stick approach. Carrot is that, by integrating with the national portal, you then get the benefit of having e-requesting. It potentially links back into your EPR, and you don't have to do that kind of paper-based kind of requesting anymore. The stick approach is, I think just a couple of months ago, we passed a new bill that allows us to mandate the use of standards within the NHS. And so if needed at some point in the future, once the specification itself becomes reasonably mature, we can then state that this should be implemented by trusts doing genomic testing.
Hello, Isaac Vetter Epic. Thank you. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Hearing more about this. As I think we're seeing a number of like organizations and locales begin to like look at e-requesting in FHIR, kind of for the first time. I think this is kind of one of the frontiers that we're seeing like getting developed and fleshed out. I think HL7 recently validated the clinical orders workflow implementation guide that attempts to try to like identify like common patterns or something like that for e-requesting.
Yep.
I know that you had the slide with like, I don't know, a dozen and a half.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know. So just, is that something that you've encountered yet? And if so, has that been useful?
Yeah. So we're aware of it. We're currently investigating whether or not we are deviating from it now that that's come out, but we intend to actually align with any existing standards where they do exist. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for your nice presentation, Omar, and thank you for your question. I would like to encourage you to fill out feedback, because we do a evaluation after, and we want to know what you thought of this presentation. A round of applause, please, for Omar. Thank you.